Hello all, welcome to my channel Fundamentals of Civil Services Exam. I hope you have been following my videos regularly. In the last class, we discussed about the definition of geography and its literary meaning. Today, we will be discussing about the evolution of geography. Let me remind you again the definition of geography. So, geography studies about the complexities of the earth or the nature of the earth and diversities across the earth. And also, it studies the relationship between human beings and environment. As far as geographical knowledge is concerned, it is very important to know about the earth. Therefore, we can protect and conserve the resources on the earth's surface, as they are very important for growth and development of every country. So this is clear that geographical knowledge is indispensable to protect the earth as well as for the development and growth of a nation. So as far as today's topic is concerned, our discussion is evolution of geography. That means how geography has evolved as a discipline or subject. We already discussed that geography, initially it was a descriptive subject. That means its main focus is on finding the sea routes and preparing the maps and describing the different features on the earth's surface. So, geography had evolved over a long period of time. So, some of the earliest geographical studies go back about 4,000 years ago. And the main focus at the beginning was explorations. And the early explorers traveled and tried to map the new places. And it was the ancient Greek scholars who laid the foundations and gave a solid form to geographic studies. And on these foundations, the pillars of modern geography were erected by others in the subsequent ages. So, this emphasizes that at the beginning, the main focus was on explorations. And of course, ancient Greek scholars laid the foundations for the geographical studies. And based on those studies, the scholars from the subsequent ages developed the geography subject. And also, not only Greeks, Romans, Arabs, Indians, the Chinese, Germans, French, and British and American geographers have contributed to the development and enrichment of the subject. That means, along with the Greek scholars across the world, that means Indian scholars, Arabs, Romans, Chinese, Germans also contributed for the development of the subject. You may have a question. What is the need to study the evolution of geography? So here the point is to understand any subject in its totality and in its entirety, it is very important to understand its evolutionary process so that you will be in a position to understand what the subject is about. So for that we are studying the evolution of geography. And as I said earlier, the Greek scholars were the people who laid the foundation for the geography. Their main focus on the spatial nature of human and physical features of the earth. So the spatial nature of human means how the human beings are modifying their surroundings, and also the physical features of the earth. And the first Greek geographer was Herodotus, who wrote a number of volumes on the human and physical geography. And also, the earlier geographers were descriptive geographers, as I said earlier. They concerned with answering questions like what is where on the earth. In the sense, their main focus was what is where on the earth. And the questions like why it is there came later. So that means the earlier scholars of geography mainly focused on describing the things. That means they didn't focus on why the mountains are formed, or how the oceans are formed, and how the rainfall occurs. All these things were not under the scholarly works of earlier geographers. Their main focus was on where the mountains are located, and where are the oceans, and where are the dense forests, and drawing the maps, etc. So they didn't focus on why it is there. They focused only on what is where. So that was the main emphasis of geography at the beginning stage. And the development of geography can be summarized in three phases, namely the age of discovery, that is from 1400 to 1800, and the period between 1800 to 1950, and the period after 1950. So that means the evolution of geography can be categorized into three phases. Now we will look into each and every phase, which leads to the evolution of geography as a discipline, or the fully developed discipline. If you look at the first phase, that is the age of discovery between 1400 to 1800. I think you do know that the age of Renaissance means rebirth. The age of Renaissance was began in 15th century. And of course, that led to explorations and scientific discoveries in European continent. And as far as the geography is concerned, during this period, the subject matter and the methodology of geography were not fully developed. For every subject, there is subject matter and the methodology. Methodology means the approach to understand the subject. That is called as methodology. So, during the initial phase of geography, the subject matter as well as methodology were not fully developed. And the discipline was in embryonic stage. That means at the beginning stage. So this period, how can we characterize this period? That means what is the main emphasis of this period? This period can be characterized by exploration, discovery, and conquest through the voyages of Vasco da Gama and Christopher Columbus. I think you heard about Vasco da Gama and Christopher Columbus. Vasco da Gama discovered a sea route to India. And also, numerous journeys of geographical exploration were commissioned by a number of nations in Europe. During this period, many countries across the Europe funded or patronized the voyages or explorations towards the discovery of new lands or new continents. And of course, the voyages provided an opportunity for scientific investigations. For example, making of maps was an important in the discipline of geography. So due to emphasis on location of phenomena on the Earth's surface, that means the main objective of the explorations was to find the new places and the new lands in search of resources. And also they discovered new trade routes. And of course, this age, that is between 1400 to 1800, has been, or this age has been the main foundation for the colonialism, because during this period, new trade routes were discovered, and these routes were exploited by the European countries in order to make other countries as colonies. And of course, I discussed about colonialism in my previous lectures. Please do watch and understand the meaning of colonialism. And the next is the period between 1800 to 1950. Mainly, this period was characterized by the work of various individual philosophers who helped to expand the scope of geography. In the earlier period, that is between 1400 to 1800, the main emphasis of geography was explorations and finding new places and creating new maps was the main emphasis. And later, and during this period from 1800 to 1950, the scope of geography was further extended by the scholars of geography. For example, the geographic knowledge saw strong growth in Europe and the United States in the 1800s. And this period also saw the emergence of number of scientific societies interested in geographic issues. So what is the meaning of scientific societies? Scientific societies means a school of thoughts. That means a group of people who share common perspective or ideas or beliefs on certain issues. So in Germany, Alexander von Humboldt and Karl Ritter and Friedrich Radgel made substantial contributions to human and physical geography. And of course, a Humboldt publication, Cosmos, in 1884, examines the geology and physiography of the earth. That means scholars, they conduct a lot of research work and they publish the books or journals to explain their research works. In the same way, Humboldt published Cosmos in 1844. That work studies about the geology and physical geography of the earth. And of course, geology studies about the different materials, that means rock material on the earth, and the formation of the mountains, the internal structure of the earth, etc. All this comes under the study of geology. Simply, geology studies the physical nature of the earth. And during this period, there are two schools of thought that emerged during this period as an attempt to explain the relationship between human beings and their environment. So that means during this phase, two schools of thought. I already told you, school of thought means a group of people who shares common perspective or belief or an idea regarding certain issue or certain concept. So that is called school of thought. So during this period, two schools of thought emerged. So one school of thought is called as environmental determinism, and another school of thought is called as a possibilism. So what is the meaning of environmental determinism and possibilism? So environmental determinism means environment determines the human activities. That means human beings conduct their activities according to the terms and conditions that are determined by the environment. See, for example, nomadic pastoralism or nomadic pastorals. That means people who move from one place to another place with their herd or cattle for green pastures. In the sense, they don't try to modify their surroundings. Instead, they follow the directions of the nature and they move from one place to another place in search of green pastures. So this is the best example for environmental determinism. And another example is human beings cannot cultivate crops. For example, rice crops or wheat crop or fruits in Arctic and Antarctic, because there the environment is not conducive for the cultivation of these crops. So this is called environmental determinism. That means environment determines the terms and conditions for the human beings. That means it dictates how the human beings has to behave on this earth. For example, tsunamis, earthquakes. So all these natural calamities reorient the human activities on the earth's surface. So these are the best examples for environmental determinism. As well as possibilism is concerned, possibilism means, according to the scholars who support the possibilism, environment provides the opportunities and the human beings can modify their surroundings. That means possibilism says that environment won't determine the actions of the human beings completely. So that is the main emphasis of possibilism. So we will look into these two concepts more comprehensively. And the proponents of environmental deterministic school of thought were Mackinder, Alan Semple, and Huntington. They believed that human actions and activities were molded by the physical conditions. I already told you the human activities are totally controlled by the environment according to the deterministic school of thought. And the good example for environmental determinism is the influence of natural environment on human activities, such as nomadic pastoralism. I already told you they move from one place to another place in search of green pastures. And the nomadic pastoralists, they mostly depend on natural environment, and of course they do very little to modify their environment. And as far as possibilist school of thought is concerned, this thought was, or this idea was promoted by Vidal de la Blasche, and of course he was the person who supported the possibilistic thought in geographical studies, and he saw environment as a limiting factor rather than a deterministic force. That means, what is the meaning of limiting factor? Limiting factor in the sense environment provides certain limits. That means they are not absolute. That means environment is not absolute in determining the human course of action. So he was trying to say that human beings can be able to human beings can modify the environment to fulfill their needs. So that was the main emphasis of Vidal de la Blasche. So according to the possibilism school of thought, human beings have several alternatives in their environment, and their actions are influenced by the decisions they make in the environment. That means the human actions are completely controlled by the humans themselves. That means the control of environment is minimal on the human activities. So that was the main emphasis of possibilism. For example, I think you know about Israel. Of course, it is located in the dry region, and most of the landform in the Israel is desert. However, they were able to produce fruits and different agricultural varieties in that region. That means even though they didn't have enough irrigation facilities or enough water resources and fertile soil, they are able to produce good agricultural products. And of course, Israel is known for agricultural exports. So this shows that the possibilists were correct. That means the human beings can modify their surroundings in order to fulfill their needs. So that is the meaning of possibilism. So a good example is that many arid countries means less amount of rainfall, minimal amount of rainfall compared to another areas. That means arid means almost these are desert areas. Arid means desert areas. So Humans have overcome the constraints set by natural environment such as low rainfall, as I said earlier, high temperatures and poor soils. And obviously the arid regions have poor soils, that means infertile soils. So in spite of these huge adversities, and countries like Israel were able to modify their surroundings in order to produce their needs. So the possibilities are correct up to certain extent that human beings can modify their surroundings in order to fulfill their needs. And the last phase in the process of evolution of geography, that is the period after 1950. So until 1950s, geography was more on facts and casual observation in the field rather than measurement and hypothesis testing. In the sense, up to or prior to 1950s, the scientific investigations in geography was very minimal. Scientific investigations were minimal. That means the main focus of the subject was describing the various features on the Earth's surface. There was no attempt to construct universal laws as far as geography is concerned. And the period after 1950s laid the foundations for scientific investigation in geography. That means creating universal laws for this subject. So what is the use of law? Basically, law is used to make predictions about the phenomenon or certain aspect in the future. So that is the main purpose of law. And of course, law brings the scientific sense for a subject. So after 1950s, the geographic scholars tried to generalize or try to develop the geography as a scientific discipline. That means they started using mathematical methods, and also they created models and laws to explain the various phenomena in geography. For example, in the 1950s, there was a new development in the discipline, and several laws were established to explain geographical phenomena. For example, models were developed to explain the formation of the mountains, and also models were developed to explain the rainfall pattern. So all these aspects came into limelight during this period. That means the period after 1950. And one of the important developments in this period was the use of quantitative techniques in physical and human geography. So what is the meaning of quantitative techniques? Quantitative techniques means using mathematical methods to understand the phenomena in a much precise and accurate manner. So that is the meaning of quantitative techniques. And of course, geography was bifurcated into human geography and physical geography. And of course, human geography studies about the modifications on landscape that are taken forward by the human beings, or how the human beings are modifying their surroundings. So this was the main emphasis of human geography. As far as physical geography is concerned, its main emphasis was studying the nature of the landscapes and how the mountains are formed and how the oceans are formed, and studying about the atmosphere, and of course studying about the environment and ecosystems, which comes under biogeography and environmental geography, and studying about the soil formation. So all these aspects comes under the physical geography. So basically physical geography's focus is on understanding the nature of the earth. So these techniques refer to various statistical tools that are used to synthesize the data from maps, field laboratories, and questionnaires. And quantification came about as a result of the expanding scope of the discipline, as well as this quantification made the geography more diversified. So these were the developments in 1950. So what is the meaning of a quantitative revolution or quantitative techniques? That means why the quantitative methodology is considered as a revolution in geography. Because prior to the introduction of quantitative methods in geographical studies, geography was a descriptive subject. In the sense, it confined its discussions up to a descriptive level. There were no development of laws and there were no usage of mathematical techniques in geography. But after the introduction of quantitative methods, there was a paradigm shift in geographical studies. That means the scholars started using mathematical tools and started creating models and laws to explain the geographical phenomena. That's why this is considered as an quantitative revolution. So quantitative revolution involves the use of statistics, mathematical equations, and use of deterministic models. And of course, many geographers believed that this quantitative revolution or quantitative methods will provide more precise and accurate subject. That means they believed that by using mathematical techniques, they can create laws and different models to explain the geographical phenomena. So that was the main emphasis of quantitative revolution. So it is called as revolution because it led to a paradigm shift in geographical studies. What is the meaning of paradigm? Paradigm means a pattern of thought or a pattern of study is called as paradigm. So paradigm shift means the shift in the pattern of study is called as paradigm shift. So this quantitative revolution has laid the foundations for a paradigm shift in geographical studies. And of course, after 1950s, for example, you heard about plate tectonic theory. So this was promoted or this was introduced after 1950s. So that was the result of scientific investigation and quantitative methodologies. So that's all for today. I hope you understood today's lecture. If you like my video, please do subscribe and share it to as many as possible. And in tomorrow's class, we will discuss about the various themes of geography. So, dear viewers, I hope you understood about the definition of the geography and the literary meaning of the geography and its significance. And also, I hope you understood about the evolution of geography as a discipline. In simple words, geography has evolved in 3 stages, that is from 1400 to 1800 and from 1800 to 1950s and post 1950s. So these are the 3 phases for the evolution of geography. And of course, initially geography was initially the main emphasis of geography was studying about the different features of the Earth's surface and exploring new places and exploring trade routes, etc. And after, the domain or the scope of the geography is increased. For example, quantitative revolution has revolutionized the geographical studies. And of course, quantitative revolution has been introduced not only in geography, it has been introduced in many other disciplines. Actually, this quantitative revolution has led to the foundation of using mathematical methods in various disciplines to make them more precise and accurate. So basically, quantitative revolution or quantitative methods helps us to predict what is going to happen in the future. So that's all for today. Thank you very much.